Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Just a quick note before we start this conversation. We've upgraded our audio, but we recorded this conversation with Rand Blake prior to that. So this is our Zoom audio feed. Apologize for the bad quality, but the conversation is certainly worth it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Audiation in the Wild. My name is Bo Talifer. I'm here with my co-host Eric Rasmussen. In this episode, we have a conversation with American pianist, composer, and educator Rand Blake. I first found out about Rand Blake through his book, Primacy of the Ear. Now, our whole intention with making this podcast and calling it Audiation in the Wild was to have conversations with music teachers that really exemplified music learning theory. So these are people that may have not studied directly with Edwin Gordon, but whose work really highlights what Gordon was after. And for anyone familiar with Edwin Gordon's work, Rand Blake is about the most vicious proponent of aural that you will ever find. So I hope you enjoy this short little conversation that we have with Rand, and I highly encourage you to check out his website, his recordings, and his materials. Rand, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So I found your work just over a year and a half ago. I can't even remember who recommended Primacy of the Ear, but I had a great time reading it and really resonated with it. And I shared it with Eric here recently, and he
Have
picked
you
up a copy.
been able to run through Vanguard?
So I went through Vanguard quite a while ago, but I didn't keep that one up in my recall. I went right into making it my own playlist. But it was a great time.
But there are two slightly more recent pieces that you might listen to. Memphis for Dr. Martin Luther King and The Short Life of Barbara Monk, who died at 32 years of age after getting the mayor of New York to agree to name the street after her father.
Wow!
It was
so those are two new pieces that are up on the SoundCloud.
I don't know what SoundCloud is. They're on YouTube.
Oh, they're on YouTube. Yeah, so we just wanted to chat with you about some of your ideas and see where this kind of takes us. Eric, he's a big fan of your work after just discovering it recently. But we all kind of have a passion for really the importance of learning music by ear as this fundamental centerpiece of being a musician, and not just a training activity that's done off to the side. And that's actually one of the reasons I got together with Eric, is we share those kind of ideas. And
I think the eye is useful if there's one note you can't hear. That is if you're hearing modern music, or if you're going to conduct, or you need blueprints for composition, orchestra. But the eye really, I've said this many times, it's a cliche, keep your eye on your friends Picasso, cats, reading books, and really give your ear plenty of vitamins. And I really feel by learning a melody every 3 days, it doesn't have to be overcomplicated, going through the process of singing with the material, singing alone, playing with the material, performing alone. And if you're a drummer, there are things you can do with the melody on different, comparing, just, I don't know what kind of a set you might have, whether it's timpani or anything tuned, or just keep if the melody's rather unique, like those of Monk are, it's good just to imitate the melody. This ear work is such a part of my life. I've been teaching at the New England Conservatory for more than 52 years and find time for calculus, which I'm terrible at in viewing film noir.
Just out of curiosity, when you were younger, when did this interest of or this passion for harmony spring forth? Because I mean, Primacy of the Ear talks about a lot more than harmony, obviously. But when did this passion that you have for harmony come online?
There were two kinds of music, and the harmonic, really Prokofiev, Scythian Suite, his early stuff is so great. Debussy, Ravel, some movie music. Some it's pretty trashy and old-fashioned, but they're even brilliant moments in Bernard Herrmann's score for a wonderful film. The Concerto Macabre is the name. And then speaking, I also like Stan Kenton, but only for 3 years. So that the 48 through 50, maybe 53, there was the album Progressive Jazz, and one of my favorite singers, Chris Connor, has kept the legend alive a lot. And then, of course, my other background was spirituals, Mahalia Jackson, and of course, I follow The Voice. You've read Primacy, so Abby Lincoln, Jean Lee, Billie Holiday, Dinah Washington, Sarah Vaughan, Whitney Houston, Aretha, Ray Charles, Al Green, so many more, and Chris Connor.
Great choices.
So with I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on with learning a melody. A lot of modern jazz students are told transcribing is a good practice to get into. And I'm wondering if you could say a few words on the difference between learning a melody through recall and committing the melody to memory and being able to sing it versus transcribing note for note, where you stop the recording, maybe find the next note on your instrument, stop, and what the real difference is between those two processes. Because to me, they're radically different.
You've outlined it very well. I can't beat you. I think transcription can be used twice if that will help you overnight and for a day, bringing the eyes in focus, but then put the transcriptions. Of course, you may have to check, are you right or not? And I think then a transcription can be helpful later to recall the piece in case your CD player is on the blink. But I feel there are people that have done this and they can't remember the music a month or two later.
I think then
you have to keep the rhythm of the piece.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think a lot of teachers have that experience when you're trying to help a student learn a melody. If you're not helping them recall the melody in a way that's getting it into long-term memory, as you talk about it in Primacy of the Ear, that exact phenomenon happens where they can pick up a few notes of what you're doing, but then it just dissolves by the time they come back.
And it can be exhausting, and it's very important to get away from music and sound altogether. Some people cannot in dormitories or crowded cities, but it's you can also overdo. It's best done over a period of 6 days, and then take a day off or something. But actually, and you want to the first couple of times just listen to it, savor it, enjoy the downbeat, the timbre, the decay, the space that Monk and Webern use so judiciously, and also to hear this during sleep or before may enable you to get up in the morning whistling or singing this. Your partner might not appreciate it, your bed partner.
There's a whistle ban in my house. Just because singing will fly fine, but I'm always singing or whistling something, and so there's a whistle ban in place in my house.
Well, as long as they're not just campfire songs are good, but they, get to the Carter family, and I challenging for me to get Joni Mitchell down because it's such a different style. And I recently recorded Time Remembered. I think it's one of Bill Evans' greatest compositions. Actually, these didn't seem to be on my iPad a couple of days ago, so maybe whoever runs something decided enough ran Blake. And get to know some of the musicians. My meetings with Mingus Monk, Max Roach, so many people, of course, George Russell and Gunther Schuller, and earlier teachers like Kate Wolf and Ray Casarino and Mary Lou Williams. But just to know, it's amazing that until 1965, Thelonious Monk was in the phone book in New York. Maybe you're too young, Eric, to know what a phone book is.
No, I'm 60. I don't act it, but
Yeah, getting to know musicians. Some of my teachers that I've been close with, just their own personality, what they're playing, or hearing them unpack what they're thinking about when they're listening or when they're playing. I think both of those have had a big impact on me. That happened with Dizzy. I remember when I was into Dizzy. I'm in my 30s now, in my 20s though. I thought Dizzy was always thinking harmony, 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 and then as I started hearing little stories about him, it was rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. But he was talking about rhythm all the time too, and I guess I was on that harmony one-track mind at the time. But
I think it's all too forgotten now, the harmony. And also, you should, besides, if you want to compose, it's very important to learn standards and not just My Funny Valentine or Stella. There are many unknown things like Harold Arlen's I Wonder What's Happened to Me, and some Monk originals, Hananika, especially incredible Bud Powell, and then Mary Lou Williams, What's Your Story, Morning Glory, and then what Thomas Dorsey, not Tommy Dorsey, Thomas Dorsey, and how Mahalia interprets his music is so incredible. And I don't know if you both like Mildred Falls. For several years, worked with Mahalia, a wonderful pianist. Her harmony may not flip you, but her rhythm, her soul, her accuracy, making it really a very firm texture for Mahalia to glide on. And I had 3 lessons with her. She was very broad-minded about the direction I was going, but we concentrated. She wanted me to concentrate on the fundamentals.
with your experience as a professor and teaching, and 'cause if I'm not mistaken, you were chair of the contemporary improv department at New England
10 years
Conservatory.
ago. Yeah.
Okay. With your experience with students that were coming in with improv, what were common things you were seeing that students needed to work on? With my own experience as a teacher, I've seen a lot of just vocabulary issues. People aren't listening to the music, and they don't have a sense of vocabulary, whether it's motifs or just little musical ideas in their mind. And that's what I found. But I obviously haven't taught at the level that you have. And I'd be interested to see what kind of the hurdles people show up with when they're at New England.
And I think I wish we could track alums more, and I'd love to collaborate on anybody who would really work on my regime with me and guarantee to help me in years later to see. I know in Barcelona, a former student sang accurately melodies that he learned through us. And by the way, I'm not the only person in third stream. Eden McAdams Summer and Hank are so marvelous, and they, I think, are carrying on the pleasure and the burdens. And New England Conservatory has really been in the forefront since Gunther took over. And of course, you've got Bruce Brubaker from the piano department, and Steve Drury, and there's Ken Shatworth in the jazz department with Jason Moran. And of course, there, I'm sure, fine teachers in Curtis, Berkeley, out west. Where am I speaking to you both from?
I'm outside Baltimore. I work at the Peabody Preparatory of Johns Hopkins.
I should have mentioned Peabody. And how about you?
And I'm just outside of Vancouver, just about half an hour drive from Vancouver in British Columbia in Canada.
And you have the nicest, there's a guy on radio who, I played there years ago with Houston Pearson. Do you know who he is?
I'm not familiar with him.
A wonderful tenor player who's on my album Suffield Gothic, but he's got about 25 records under his name. And I ran into him in North Hartford in 1954 or 55. And he is the earth, Houston Pearson. So he was a stabilizing source. And I've had marvelous singers to work with: Sarah Surfa, Dominic Eade, Christine Correa. Do any of them ring a bell? Well, they're young and they're getting their careers out. And Ricky Ford on tenor is a delight, and probably the guitar player you may not know, Knife Fabris. He called himself Knife because I sent him to a terrible film noir film once. And when he came back to do the music, he brought a knife on the guitar. So we used to call him David, but now it's a Knife.
I have a friend who I think took one of your classes a long time ago, James Carson, piano player. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you remember him, but he spoke very highly of you.
When was this? Do you know?
I don't know what year he attended New England. I think he mentioned he took, I think it was a class about film music or film noir and music, something along those lines. Yeah,
I've done that for about 20 years.
Yeah,
and I might not remember. I wish I could remember all, but I do tell him to keep in touch, and I'd like to see if he's still seeing these films. Where does he live?
So I'm not sure where James is at the moment. I think he's usually between New York and I believe his family's in Alberta here in Canada. So I think he goes back and forth. But he's a great musician, and he spoke very highly of you, and I think you had a big impact on him.
In Canada, two great cities. I know there are many, but Vancouver and Quebec City. And if you can deal with the tall buildings, there's nothing wrong with Toronto. But it's a wonderful country.
Unfortunately, in Vancouver, there's a decent jazz scene going on here, but one of the main clubs that was kind of the epicenter of the jazz scene closed down years ago, and now the jazz scene is more sprinkled around Vancouver. But I would love to get out to the East Coast someday.
You would love to. What did you say about these? I understand this club closed down. And it was not because of COVID, but that's terrible. And then the musicians are scattered around. And did you say you'd like to import East Coast
I would love to just get out.
Or would you like to get there and live in New York for a month or two?
Yeah, I'd love to explore the East Coast, whether New York or even, I think even Quebec City has, the scene is a little different than here in Vancouver. It's
very small, but there's a wonderful club, and they flew me up for me to do live music for the film I Confess. Have you seen that? With Montgomery Clifton and Baxter. It's a Hitchcock film. So I was shown all the scenes where the priests lived, where the pleasure houses were, the churches, the scenery of Special Bridge. And it's quite good that it's small, and it may not have a terribly big audience, but a lot of people are very receptive. And I think Vancouver is too, but not British Columbia.
Yeah, Vancouver is quite tight-knit and supportive and receptive, but British Columbia at large, not so much.
I didn't do that well in Montreal, but I really failed in British Columbia. Pete drove through walking out the door.
So I'm wondering if you can maybe go back a little bit and describe for us what is the main difference in the third stream approach that we're talking about here? Because I'm familiar with it, but maybe for anyone who's listening, just to get a feel for.
There's a lot of third stream that's composed, or many musicians who identify it who do not use the ear. And by the way, learning by ear has been happening for centuries in Africa, in India, parts of South America. So we didn't invent everything. I think some third stream music was wonderful, but sometimes you would get by the way, I love Hollywood, but sometimes you could get some slick orchestrations with close to jazz and harmonic music with maybe a teaspoon of Ornette or Charles Ives. And some of it's so valid. What Gunther's done, the modern jazz quartet, flirts with it, although they don't incorporate much of 20th century harmony. And this was the blend of two rivers making a third river, and Gunther used to emphasize that there would still be a classical river, maybe Peabody would be the name of one river, and maybe Vancouver would be the jazz river, and somewhere maybe near, let's go a little closer to the West Coast, in Billings, Montana, these meet and they make a little stream. So third stream, we wanted to broaden the definition because there was a guy from Argentina that studied in our department, and he liked jazz, but he wanted to really find Hinisteri he might from his own country, but he loved some of the biting Shostakovich, some Brahms Liszt, when they're when they're not only just technical or going quickly, and also Bernard Herrmann. So many people he loved, but he didn't want to play it. He really wanted to dig into modern classical music and incorporate this in his tango playing. His name was not Astor Piazzolla, but he did do fairly well for a few years after leaving the department, and with life's busyness and everything, I only keep up with alums that write me. And then, of course, we made it a verb, third streaming, or to third stream, and that's where you really do the aerobics on a daily, weekly basis. By the way, are you both experiencing heat wave?
I am.
Oh, I bet you are near Baltimore.
Quite cool here right now. We had a bit of a wave last week, and I get the heat exhaustion. It's very humid here, so it happens fast. Yeah. The definition of third stream that you use, the one that you coined on top of Gunther's, the verb third streaming, the process of learning material by ear and doing the aerobics and and mixing different inspirations, not being so worried about whether it's classical or jazz or another.
But you don't want to be
genre.
too slick about it.
In what way?
Well, really don't. I love Horace Silver, but because he went to Japan from 1 week and did Tokyo Blues, he does not bring in the old court music or the country, and nor would I be able to if I was in a country for 10 days and just wanted to do different kinds of scales. So it's really using very carefully. You don't have to study pharmacology, but you really you want to listen to a lot of CDs or internet and really go rather slowly. You've got to get music in your life. And if these two musical idioms have not formed something rather cohesive in your daily vocabulary by the time you're 25, you still can gather wonderful things to share music with, but it maybe it would be very hard to learn a new language in your 20s or late 20s. But who knows?
Yeah. I heard an interesting idea that an author, and I have to apologize, I can't remember who the author is, but we often use this analogy between learning language by ear and learning our first language by ear. And the author was stating that a lot of people will claim that kids learn a first language seemingly effortlessly, but they're spending 12 plus hours a day for 5 years straight doing it. And if a lot of adults put the same kind of time into learning a language by ear, you get actually pretty fast results compared. But we just don't usually have the time that a kid has.
Well, I used to have the time for Spanish, but I'll tell you, the ear work was the hardest. And for a person that's devoted life to the ear, not only my music, but really having gone to so many clubs in New York, in Lincoln Center, New York Philharmonic, string quartets, even when the language is slowed down, it is terrible. To speak it is a little better if anybody can stand my accent. And then to read it, which was my least talent in music, was the way it could come to me. And I keep thinking that if I go back to French or Spanish, maybe I should work on my strengths and read a little more, write a little more, and not just, maybe my ear just cannot capture words. It's a
Maybe,
whole
yeah.
different process.
Yeah.
Some of the research suggests in neuroscience that by 9 months old, you lop off parts of the brain. You lop off phonemes of if you're not experiencing the language of another culture, that part of the brain is going to get used up for something else. And so you actually lose a particular part of the brain if you haven't listened to, Japanese, for instance.
What do you think? What are other directions the brain might go?
Oh, it'll
maybe
use
a young engineer.
It'll use it for anything. People that are born unsighted, or people who are born without hearing. I've worked with a couple children who were born deaf with cochlear implants and teaching them to understand music at 4 and 5 years old. And their visual cortex is highly stimulated. Their oral cortex is rather small, and vice versa. If you have somebody who's not sighted, they'll use the visual cortex. The auditory cortex will cross over and use up those neurons and sections of the brain for what they're getting input from. So if you're getting input from music early on, and you don't have sight, well, your brain's gonna not let it waste.
Yeah, it's too bad. I know there's been much research done on plasticity and developing a hunger, and parents don't know really if they could choose something for their daughter or son. That might be hard. They could send them in their own directions, what they did. But there's still some there's still, you're able to manage some things at 3 or 4 even that you can't as a teenager or even 10 or 11. So it's really
well, Eric, we've discussed this a lot, but with your students who can identify, Eric has very young students who can identify a good chunk of harmonic functions by ear, and they have hand signs that go along with what they're hearing. And Eric said to me many times that often the younger kids learn it faster than the kids that are just a few years older. Like, Eric, I wonder if you could tell us about that a bit, because it's really interesting.
Yeah, so I was interested in teaching the resting tone. So in major, that's where you end. Most songs will end there if it's major. And minor, it has a different resting tone. And I was teaching, these kids, well, we have all these tones, but they don't make sense unless you have a place to end. And I said, can you end here? Fleece is white as... And I was trying to get them to sing snow for me. Fleece is white as... And that's not where you end. You end on snow. Well, I found myself playing fleece is white as, playing the dominant, and asking, can I end there? And they said, no. Yes. And so then I started teaching yes, no songs. And then, we have a new one. So the 4 chord became the subdominant. I only did this in major and minor initially. And then I had I Don't Care. And I Don't Care is from Take Me Out to the Ball Game. I don't care if I ever get back for its room. So they learned yes, no, and I don't care. It's the first.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So anyway, some of my 4-year-olds would learn all 4 of those functions in major and minor, 3 in minor, in less than 2 weeks, maybe 10 minutes each week.
Oh, by ear as well. Right?
By ear, and I have 2.5-year-olds that can tell tonic and dominant and are 90% accurate with what tonic and dominant are.
Have you written about this?
Yes, I have a book of how I approach this.
Send me the title, material, and this is very exciting.
This is all the repertoire I've used up to 9 years old that I've ever used that I could get the rights to. And then I eventually, by the time the kids were 7 or 8 years old, they would know dominant of the submediant, dominant to the supertonic, all the changes to, Take Me Out to the Ball Game is about one of the more advanced in terms of the harmonic progressions that are involved. But I teach the functions in Dorian and Mixolydian, the essential functions, just tonic, subtonic, and subdominant in most of the tonalities, whichever ones are most important. And
do you also ask them to listen to music like Sarah Vaughan's, one of her masterpieces, Pinky, which has no words on Columbia?
Yeah, I have.
And they have to hear that.
Yeah, I give them a pretty vast playlist of songs for each activity that we do in class. Babies, toddlers, 3, 4-year-olds, they listen to everything I can give them. I tend to do things that are less than 3 or 4 minutes long.
That's fine.
Because I want them to experience form. And if you get these long forms, it's hard to retain.
I just want you to grill them with pepper, like
yeah.
Do either of you know
I
that
don't know
song?
that one. My daughter grew up on Lullaby of
beautiful.
Birdland with Clifford Brown.
That's a Stratus Funk by George Russell. So your daughter grew up.
One of her favorites was Lullaby of Birdland with Clifford Brown and Sarah Vaughan, of course.
Oh, that is incredible.
And Monk, Mingus, and Joni Mitchell would be in my pantheon if you forced me to pick, and I'd fight over the fourth.
Monk, Joni Mitchell, and tell me the third.
Mingus.
Oh, he's so great. And of course, he did some wonderful recordings before he joined Columbia on his own label. They're really terrific and had wonderful musicians, Thad Jones, Jackie Paris. Yeah. And then Gunther never said he invented third stream, like Porgy and Bess has third stream. And you could say Beethoven did the folk fields and the pseudo-aristocracy. But I'm talking about totally different cultures. I love it that there is I can't tell you the name right now, there's a wonderful interpretation of Mahalia Jackson doing a Chopin etude. And that doesn't make it third stream, but she has caressed the melody and added the Afro-American touch and the blues scale.
I'm forgetting the name of the artist.
It's very exciting.
Cool. There's an artist who was doing that with, he had a whole Chopin set, and it was played as like a jazz trio he was a pianist who was playing the main part. So it was a pianist and a bass player. I'm forgetting his name, but he basically just swung the Chopin etudes, and he really had the proper like bebop phrasing down, and the Chopin etudes really came to life like that. And I used to listen to that.
When you think of it, the name, please contact me by email, because I'd be very interested. Some people jazz up the classics, like Frankie Carroll used to, and Carmen Caballero. It really loses the respect for the composer.
Swingle singers.
Yeah.
So Ren, you were asking, Eric was telling us about how he's playing, getting very young kids to identify functions by ear. That's actually why I found Eric, or how I found Eric, because of that work, and I was just fascinated with that. But you were pointing at something else too, is the importance of learning music by ear is not just to learn the correct rhythms and harmony more accurately. It's the style thing. That if you don't learn music by ear, you really miss out on, just as in the first chapter of your book, you don't learn to create a personal style. It never gets off the ground. And I like how your book actually starts with that as the first chapter. It's not because the appendices in your book talk about all these ear aerobics we can do, where we're learning how to identify all these triads and intervals and just a lot of really quality ear work that I think some people are doing. But as you pointed out a few times, that really getting into a genre or an artist with repeated listening and putting those melodies in your long-term memory, there's something about the style that starts bleeding into your playing. And so when we're creating playlists, I feel like that's something that's often forgotten, because people are just trying to get a handle on just getting through jazz changes or classical, compositions that are complex. But the style is something that's often not formally, people aren't formally guided to develop style. And Eric, I know this is something that interests you, because with the teachers you talk to, especially that are teaching younger people, with younger kids, the style is just thrown out of the window. People aren't talking about training that.
Have you made this on video or tape, or have these been recorded?
So I do have some segments of my classes that I've been able to put up, but they get flagged because I'm using recorded music in the background. And what I'm interested in doing with especially children younger than 5, 6 especially, is just getting them to move their bodies expressively and differently when there's a change in the music so that they understand form in their body.
And they might think of an animal and then on the hunt. But try to get the
and then,
ones who are 4 or 5 to just listen to a repertoire. You can't record it, but just so that not everything is a scale or dancing.
Scales are the.
And I'd love to have you. You certainly can delve into my repertoire.
Yeah.
And I want some people who are wealthy to pay and to get to learn it, but I'd be very honored if your class did some of it, and you won't have problems for me. There's so much more to say. I have to thank Aaron Hartley, who also got us together today, for a wonderful oral cocktails. I'm not using it much now, but he would put on a cocktail that would play all night long in my bedroom. And for more than 50 or 60 years, I just stay alone in my back of my apartment. And he might put on, I choose, but instead of 5 hours of Olivier Messiaen, we might have one piece. Gladys Knight could be on another one. Robert Pete Williams, my favorite authentic blues singer, and then maybe a little bit of Satie. By the way, I'm asking everybody I know, because I'm trying to find the name of a classical piece. Ever heard that before? Could it be late Schubert? There's an old movie, Secret Heart, film noir soap opera, but decent, and they play the Liszt piano concerto fragments, number 1, but they also, the heroine plays this, and when she develops it in practice, it's not just coming from a movie thing. She's looking at written music, and so I don't think there's any jazz, and whether it's early 20th century, it sounds like more the late Romantic era, but neither of you recognize that, do you?
No, I can't place that.
Sounds vaguely familiar, but I couldn't label it.
Maybe there's an internet thing I could put it on.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to post it in a couple groups. It's a piano piece, so I'd post it in the piano. Tens of thousands of pianists around the world that could maybe hear it.
Would that be hard to post?
It wouldn't be hard at all. Just need the recording of.
Okay. Maybe have.
We'll find it when you. I believe you're going to share the recording of this so that we can.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all you need to do.
Well, I could not. Secret Heart is no longer copyrighted, but it was very hard to. Aaron had to set up the adjacent remote because it's on the tiniest box on iPad, but. I forget, and it goes a few bars later, and it is from Secret Heart, and it's played by June Allison, twice on the piano, and so it must be a piano score. Can you think of any other subjects? It's so good, Eric, for you to talk. And Bo, what, besides doing these interviews, are you in education like Eric is? What are you?
I'm a music teacher here in Vancouver. I teach mainly guitar, but a bit of piano and some concert band instruments as well.
Well, look up David, Fabris. Now, do they do a lot of listening too?
My students?
Yeah.
Oh,
You have to
definitely.
give them what they want, the latest rock tune, the latest, but also to develop a passion for some dissonance chords. And do you bring that into some of the teaching? Because
Yeah.
if it's just Johnny and Mary learning how to pluck the keys, they don't become tomorrow's listeners.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, my students, it's a lot of learning by ear and by rote for the first couple of years before we get into reading any music, because I find, especially with piano students that transfer from a traditional piano method, they're just kind of burnt out of starting with the written page before they can play a couple songs on their own. Yeah. And it's amazing to see how the parents adjust to it. At first they're skeptical, but after a year or two of it, they can't believe it. I mean, some of these kids that are 7 years old, they can just figure out how to play a tune within a couple choruses that's on the radio. As long as it's.
Well, let me know if you want me to write Alice Russell about Stratus Funk. It's a 12-bar blues, and I played the first 4 bars, which are rather dissonant, and it becomes easier as you go on. But it's a marvelous, very brief piece, and you can start by clapping the rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I will do a lot, and I think this is very common for all of the kind of folk tunes and folk nursery rhyme tunes and even jazz standards, I feel like this common language that all these genres have of pieces that the average musician will know in those genres is so useful for teaching, because if you know a student knows the melody of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in a very honest way, you can reharmonize it, and the reharm actually sits in their mind as something that's familiar but new at the same time. And that's something I'll do a lot with people, is once they have a melody in their mind and they're responding to it, I'll start reharming it, and I'll send them a sound file.
All this is good, and if I know more about you, I may incorporate your ideas, but will your students know the name of Clifford Brown, even if they're guitarists? And can they remember Lullaby of Birdland or April in Paris or Jim, all those things from that classic?
One of my guitar students, actually, one of my jazz guitar students, he has your book as well, and the first playlist that he made, we had Joyce bring on it, and so he went through the process with me. We're singing the melody together and practicing recall in the lesson before we put it on the instrument. And usually at first when people start this, they're a little antsy to get it on the instrument right away. So I'll make a few concessions at the start, but as they trust me more and more with the process, they know why the singing is useful.
They should know what are unique standards. Even the John Lennon's Julia has got a little spice, and both sides from Joni. I love her mature version from the year 2000.
Yeah.
But
I heard that just the other day.
Yeah, but it is a large work. And I find that my most successful teaching is during a 3-week time in the summer where people come every day, and we can really get work done. Any other thoughts about your music, Eric, and your teaching?
No, I'm just learning to expand as the children get beyond what I've been able to do. I'm just trying to keep up with them and give them the easiest road to what they're already able to show me. So when they learn, the functions to take me out to the ball game or Don Gato, I don't know if you know that one, but just some of the more advanced stuff, it's like, what do I need to do to make it easier for me to get out of the way and provide them with more repertoire? And when Bo got in touch with me, I've always dillied around in jazz, but never learned the proper way through my training to improvise. And now that I'm teaching these 6- and 7-year-olds, all of a sudden my improvisation has gotten a whole lot better, because I hear certain functions coming around the bend much easier. I hear them before they're there. And, so I know where I'm going and start to feel the form more because of all the dancing that I've done with with my students, just to kind of set your body in time and space, and then obviously let the imagination flow.
Have they danced yet to Saber Dance?
I have that in my playlist. I have 5 playlists. I have a playlist of the blues. I have a playlist of lullabies. And then I have playlists for egg sticks and scarves, which we use to just encourage movement in the class. And, like...
What are the other 2?
Blues and lullabies. Oh,
you mentioned that. And
yeah,
you mentioned 3.
Scarves.
4.
Yeah, scarves is one. Egg shakers is another. I play a lot of Harry Belafonte.
Oh, and I love his Merci Bon Dieu.
Yeah.
That's not one of the Haitian pieces, and I know they're more authentic, but I love his punctuation.
I try to find as many easy to grasp odd meter tunes. So his Turn the World Around.
And then see if you can take a piece of, I don't think this should be the first piece for your age group, but I love Gloomy Sunday. You're both familiar with Billie Holiday, but it comes from a ghetto in Hungary. So it's Budapest. And the composer, you don't have to mention to the students, he committed suicide on his birthday. Louis Armstrong played with him. And then Paul Robeson.
Yeah.
Do you remember him from early history? Who could sing Othello and so much. And then, of course, he lost his prestige because McCarthy thought he was communist.
Yeah.
The black people of color are not treated well around the world. And then Billie Holiday hears it. Or is it Josh White who heard it first? And then we move on to Stan Kenton with my favorite arranger, Bill Russo, and June Christie, the predecessor of Chris Connor, and then the Cronus String Quartet. Ray Charles is fabulous. The first 30 seconds or a minute sort of slick, and then he really belts it out. And then there are other people like Sarah Vaughan. And the piece, when it first came out, this is more of an anecdote, but people committed suicide in Sweden. Now that has to be proven. I hope it's wrong. But you can think of so many easier pieces, Man I Love, or even an old Salter Finnegan piece, or even, has anybody done Take Me Out to a ball game like Wynton Marsalis? Has he ever played that? Or?
I don't know.
So if you want to make sure they have camp repertoire. Well, it's wonderful to talk to you both. Do you have any last minute thoughts?
No, I just want to say it was great to get to chat with you a little bit and
with you,
just explore some of the ideas a bit. I've always been a big believer in learning by ear. It's how I just kind of naturally started doing things when I was a young kid, and I saw the benefit. And your work just inspired me to kind of go even further on that, especially with listening to just more purposefully, just getting different kinds of harmonies and styles into the ear intentionally and not just haphazardly. And it's had a big impact on my playing in just the last year alone. And I'm excited to
and you can even listen to music that doesn't come. I will never be bebop pianist, but I love it so much. But when I hear gospel, I can relate quite well. Or Al Green. I wouldn't be called the Al Green pianist because I have too many film noir aspects. But and it's so wonderful hearing your ideas, Eric.
Yeah, thank you for your inspiration. The appendices and the primacy of the ear is a wealth of material for me to go through and look at where the holes might be in my repertoire, because I recognize maybe 90% of most of what you said today, people that I have a fairly firm listening.
I'm sure I can learn from both of you. Anyway, let's say goodbye, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Pleasure to meet you, Eric and Bo.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.